Hello, and welcome to another episode. So, this time I wanted to show you how to do inline animations. Something I always find strange in the examples for three is that. So, I've got a simple sketch here where we've got a constructor setting up the basic scene, camera, renderer, putting the element on the page. And what we're doing is we're adding a cube, we're adding a sphere, so green cube, red sphere, and then we're running this animate function, which calls itself on every request animation frame. And then separately, so we've declared the cube up here. Now in the animate function, elsewhere, we have to declare how we want that cube to animate. So this is what I mean by inline animations, that this isn't inline. These are separated. And then similarly, the sphere here, we're animating it separate again to where it's declared. And that always feels strange, and I think it can limit, certainly when I was learning early, it stopped me trying to separate my, say if my sphere was an element that I wanted to have on its own, I couldn't put that in its own file because then I needed to animate it separately. It felt very strange. But I've come up with a little solution that can help, and that's creating an animator class. So we can even do this in another file actually. So this isn't how I plan to do it, so I know it's going to be an issue. But let's try it that way. So we're going to make a class of animator, and it will need a constructor, and then we're going to export that class. So let's do a quick little test just to make sure everything's hooked up and import that. So import animator from animator. Cool. So if we just even log that, we'll see if it's working. Cool. So there is exactly our animator class. So it's coming through. Brilliant. So I'm going to declare this kind of towards the end because we want to make sure that, sorry, the end of our constructor, because we need to make sure that the scene and camera and everything are set up. We're going to pass a lot of that through. So we're going to say this.animator is a new animator. And the trick I learned here is to actually pass this through. So the this that we're sending through is the sketch. That's going to make more sense in a second, but it helps us get access to this.cube. So we can say, when we pass this through, when we pass the sketch through, we'll be able to access the cube variable of that sketch. So let's build this out a little, even just to recreate the animation that we have at the moment. So I'm going to actually take this whole animate function and remove it. And we're trying to do it here, so I'm going to comment that out for now. And you can see we're getting high from our constructor, but I'm going to just create an animate function here. And what I'm going to do is, so we're passing through this when we're declaring our animator. We're passing through the sketch. So I'm going to say this.sketch is equal to sketch that we're passing through. So now we have access to the sketch. So we can say, so where we have this now, it's referring to animator, but we have access to this.sketch. So if I just come here and declare this.sketch, and then we jump back, and instead of saying this.animate, we say this.animator.animate. So this will be the new animate function we've created here. Everything's the same. So brilliant. We've managed to separate into a completely different file how we animate these two, the cube and the sphere, which might seem like a bad thing, but we'll get there. One thing to point out as well, the reason that this isn't this.sketch is because we're actually referring to this animate function here and passing through its own context again. So that's why those two particular thises can stay as this.sketch. So the next thing we want to do to be able to separate our animations is to be able to pass something through to the animator. So we're going to make a little add function. What we're going to do is we're going to pass through some functions that will then be executed by the animation function. We need a place to store those. So let's call them this.tasks, make that an array. Whenever we pass in a function, we're going to add it to this.tasks. So we're going to push the function. Okay, so let's start with, we also need to then run those functions. So we're going to say this.tasks for each task, run the task, run that function that we passed through. So let's start with the cube and try and pass that through. So now the animator doesn't have the cube has stopped. So now we can declare this inline. We have the cube set up, we're adding it to the scene. Brilliant, and now we need to add the function we want to happen to the animator. So we can say this.animator.add, pass it a function, and in that function we're going to animate the cube. One thing to note now that we're coming back, we don't need to refer to this.sketch anymore, because this, in the context of the sketch, is the sketch. So we can remove that. So we now have an inline declaration of how we want that cube to animate. If we save, there we have it. It's animating. And how we've declared that animation is inline. We can neatly pull that out into its own file now. Similarly, let's do it with the sketch or the sphere. So this dot animator dot add. Oop. No one go Freudian on me there. And just remove the this dot sketches from here. And it's still working. So now we have inline declarations of animations. We can pull all this out into its own files if we want to. We now have this animator where it's doing our request animation frame, our render, all of that, and we can forget about this now. And it just makes everything that little bit neater, little bit nicer. And for me, keeping everything that I'm doing with the cube inline and together, and everything that I'm doing with the sphere inline and together, works really nicely for my brain. Maybe I'm not smart enough to do it the other way, but hopefully that's helpful. And let me know in the comments if there's any problems with it, any questions. Some really cool comments have been coming in recently. It's been really useful and helpful. Yeah, thanks. Hope you enjoyed.